The Moore family, consisting of parents Josiah B. Moore and Sarah Montgomery, along with their 4 children, Herman Montgomery, Mary Catherine, Arthur Boyd, and Paul Vernon. An affluent and well-regarded family, the Moores were prominent members of their community. On June 9, 1912, Mary Catherine invited her friends Ina May Stillinger and Lena Gertrude Stillinger to spend the night at the Moore residence. That evening, the Moore family and their guests attended the Children's Day program at the local Presbyterian church, which Sarah had organized. After the program concluded, around 9:30 p.m., the group walked home, arriving at the Moore residence between 9:45 and 10 p.m. On the morning of June 10, 1912, at around 7 a.m., Mary Peckham, a neighbor of the Moores, grew concerned when she noticed that the family had not come outside to complete their usual morning chores. Peckham knocked on the Moore's door, but no one answered. Attempting to open the door, she found it locked. After letting out the Moore's chickens, Peckham called Ross Moore, Josiah Moore's brother, to check on the family. Ross also received no response when he knocked on the door and called out. Using his copy of the house key, Ross unlocked the door. While Peckham waited on the porch, Ross entered the house, walking into the parlor. When he opened the door to the guest bedroom, he discovered the bodies of Ina and Lena Stillinger on the bed. Horrified, Ross immediately instructed Peckham to contact Henry Horton, Villisca's primary peace officer. Horton arrived shortly after and conducted a search of the home, uncovering the grisly scene. The entire Moore family and the Stillinger sisters had been brutally bludgeoned to death. The murder weapon, an axe belonging to Josiah Moore, was found in the guest bedroom with the Stillinger sisters' bodies. Medical examinations estimated the murders occurred between midnight and 5 a.m. 2 spent cigarettes in the attic suggested that the killer or killers had waited patiently for the family and their guests to fall asleep. The attack began in the master bedroom where Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping. Josiah was struck with the axe multiple times, more than any other victim. His face was so severely mutilated that his eyes were completely destroyed. A gouge mark on the ceiling indicated the force with which the axe was swung. Sarah was killed using the sharp blade of the axe, while the blunt side was used on all other victims. The murderer proceeded to the children's bedrooms, where Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur, and Paul were similarly attacked while they slept. Following this, the killer returned to the master bedroom to inflict additional blows on Josiah and Sarah, knocking over a blood-filled shoe in the process. The attacker then moved downstairs to the guest bedroom, where Ina and Lena Stillinger were killed. In a disturbing detail, a 4-pound slab of bacon was removed from the icebox and placed next to the axe in the guest bedroom. Investigators also discovered untouched food and a basin filled with bloody water in the kitchen. Evidence suggested that all victims, except Lena Stillinger, were asleep when they were attacked. Lena appeared to have woken during the assault and attempted to fight back. She was found laying crosswise on the bed, with a defensive wound on her arm. Her undergarments had been removed, and her body had been positioned in a sexual suggestive manner, leading investigators to suspect that the killer may have attempted or committed a sexual assault. However, later investigations found no definitive evidence of this. Adding to the strangeness of the scene, all mirrors in the house had been covered with blankets or clothing, and the garments from the dressers were used for this purpose. This peculiar behavior further deepened the mystery surrounding the case. Following the search of the Moore's house, the scene descended into chaos, as townfolk were allowed inside to view the grisly aftermath. At approximately 8:40 a.m., the town's central telephone center issued an all-call alert notifying every household of the murders. Within minutes, the house was overrun by curious residents, which led to the scene being severely contaminated. Some individuals even stole fragments of Josiah Moore's skull as souvenirs. The axe, which was the murder weapon, was handled by hundreds of people. It took hours before Sheriff Owen Jackson could regain any semblance of control over the situation. Dr. Lindquist, the county coroner, arrived at the scene around 9 a.m. After inspecting the crime scene, he met with Horton, the town's night watchman from Sunday, and Sheriff Jackson to review the gathered evidence. Frustrated by the steady influx of townsfolk disrupting the investigation, Lindquist urged the sheriff to request assistance from the National Guard to secure the site. By 10:30 a.m., the National Guard had established a perimeter around the property to keep spectators out. A local druggist and photography enthusiast arrived at the scene intending to take photographs, but was dismissed, being told that taking pictures was too ghoulish. Dr. Lindquist convened members of the coroner's jury in the late afternoon, but it was several hours before they entered the Moores home to examine the bodies. It wasn't until after 10 p.m. that Lindquist contacted County Attorney Radcliffe to grant permission for the undertaker to remove the victims. The bodies were transported to the fire station, which had been set up as a temporary morgue. By the time all bodies were moved, it was close to 2 a.m., nearly 24 hours after the murders had occurred. Doctors initially estimated that the murders occurred between midnight and 2 a.m. based on preliminary examinations. The victims' autopsies revealed that all had died from severe head injuries. Questions arose about how the killer could navigate the compact and creaky farmhouse without waking anyone. At the time, newspapers speculated that the murderer might have used a sedative in milk or cocoa to incapacitate the victims, though toxicology studies were not routinely conducted during autopsies at this time. In the barn, investigators discovered a depression in the hay near a knothole, suggesting the killer may have watched the family for some time before entering the house. 2 spent cigarettes found in the attic indicated the intruder could have entered through a window or an unlocked back door and hidden there, waiting for the family to return home from church. 2 peculiar pieces of evidence were also found at the scene. A gas lamp with its glass chimney removed and wick turned down to emit only a faint light was discovered upstairs. Additionally, a fragment of a keychain that did not belong to the Moore family was found downstairs. After this limited investigation, the coroner convened an inquest on June 11, 1912. During the inquest, 13 individuals were interviewed as potential witnesses. Over time, numerous suspects were identified in connection with the murders, including Reverend George Kelly, Frank F. Jones, William Mansfield, Loving Mitchell, Paul Mueller, and Henry Lee Moore. No relation to the victims. Reverend Kelly was tried twice for the crime. The first trial resulted in a hung jury, while the second concluded with his acquittal. Other suspects investigated during the case were also ultimately exonerated. Every transient or otherwise unaccounted for stranger became a suspect in the investigation, including Andrew Sawyer. While he was interrogated, he was never charged. Sawyer exhibited peculiar behavior, displaying an unusual obsession with the murders. He reportedly slept fully clothed, as if prepared for a hasty escape, and kept an axe by his bedside. Reverend George Kelly, an English-born traveling minister, was in Villisca on the night of the murders. Known for his peculiar behavior, Kelly reportedly suffered a mental breakdown during his youth. As an adult, he was accused of voyeurism and repeatedly asked young women and girls to pose nude for him. On June 8, 1912, he arrived in Villisca to participate in the Children's Day services, which the Moore family had attended on June 9th. The following morning, June 10th, Kelly left town between 5 a.m. and 5:50 a.m., just hours before the bodies were discovered. Though Kelly confessed to the murders in court, the jury ultimately dismissed his confession. In the weeks after the crime, Kelly displayed an unusual fascination with the case, writing numerous letters to the police, investigators, and the victims' families. This behavior raised suspicion. A private investigator responded to one of Kelly's letters, asking for details about the murders. Kelly replied with vivid descriptions, claiming to have heard sounds and possibly witnessed the killings. However, his history of mental illness led authorities to question whether his knowledge stemmed from personal involvement or delusions. In 1914, 2 years after the murders, Kelly was arrested for sending obscene material through the mail, specifically for sexually harassing a woman who had applied to be his secretary. He was subsequently sent to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, a national mental institution in Washington, D.C. This renewed speculation about Kelly's potential involvement in the Villisca murders. In 1917, Kelly was formally arrested for the Villisca killings. Police obtained a confession from him after many hours of interrogation, but he later recanted. After 2 separate trials, Kelly was acquitted of all charges. Frank Fernando Jones, a Villisca resident and an Iowa state senator, became a person of interest in the case due to his connections to Josiah Moore. Moore had previously worked for Jones at his implement store, but later left to establish his own competing business. This departure reportedly strained their relationship, as Moore was said to have taken significant business from Jones, including a lucrative John Deere dealership. Additionally, rumors circulated that Moore had been involved in a sexual affair with Jones's daughter-in-law, though no evidence ever substantiated this claim. Another theory suggested that Senator Frank Jones hired William Mansfield, an ex-convict and former U.S. Army soldier stationed at Fort Leavenworth, to murder the Moore family. 9 months before the Villisca murders, a similar axe murder occurred in Colorado Springs, Colorado. 2 additional axe murders followed in Ellsworth, Kansas, and Paola, Kansas. The similarity between these cases raised the possibility that they were the work of the same individual. Other unsolved murders potentially linked to these crimes included the axe murders along the Southern Pacific Railroad in 1911 and 1912, the killings attributed to the Axeman of New Orleans, and other similar cases during this period. The Colorado Springs murders bore striking similarities to the Moore killings. H.C. Wayne, his wife, child, and Mrs. A.J. Burnham were murdered with an axe. In both cases, the killer used bedsheets to cover windows, preventing anyone from looking inside. At the Moore house, aprons and skirts were hung for the same purpose. Additionally, in both cases, the murderer wiped the blood from the axe and covered the victims' heads with bedclothes. Mansfield was a prime suspect identified by the Burns Detective Agency of Kansas City and Detective James Newton Wilkerson. Wilkerson claimed Mansfield was a cocaine-addicted serial killer responsible for multiple murders, including the axe killings of his own wife, infant child, father-in-law, and mother-in-law in Blue Island, Illinois on July 5, 1914, 2 years after the Villisca murders. He was also suspected of the Paola, Kansas murders days before the Villisca killings and the murders of Jeannie Peterson and Jeannie Miller in Aurora, Illinois. Wilkerson argued that all these murders were carried out in the same manner, suggesting a single perpetrator. He alleged that Mansfield was present at each crime scene on the nights of the murders. Commonalities included victims being hacked to death with an axe, mirrors in the homes being covered, a burning lamp with its chimney removed left at the foot of the bed, and a basin used by the murderer to wash up in the kitchen. Wilkerson also noted that the killer wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, aligning with Mansfield's knowledge that his fingerprints were on file at the Leavenworth military prison. In 1916, Wilkerson persuaded a grand jury to open an investigation. Mansfield was arrested and brought to Montgomery County from Kansas City. However, payroll records provided an alibi, placing him in Illinois at the time of the Villisca murders. Mansfield was released due to lack of evidence and later won a lawsuit against Wilkerson, receiving $2,225 in damages. Wilkerson believed that the political pressure from Senator Jones not only led to Mansfield's release, but also contributed to the subsequent arrest and trial of Reverend Kelly. Despite Mansfield's release, R.H. Thorpe, a restaurant owner from Shenandoah, Iowa, identified him as the man he saw boarding a train at Clarinda the morning after the murders. The man reportedly claimed to have walked from Villisca, a detail that, if proven true, could discredit Mansfield's alibi. Additionally, a Mrs. Vina Tompkins from Marshalltown reportedly intended to testify that she overheard 3 men plotting the Moore family murders in the woods shortly before the crime. Even with all these suspects, no one was ever charged with the murders. Today, the house stands as a popular tourist attraction in the small rural town of Villisca, Iowa. In 1995, a couple purchased the home and meticulously restored it to its original 1912 condition, undoing all modern renovations. They now offer guided tours and overnight stays, with the house's notoriety stemming from its reputation as a haunted location due to the tragic events that occurred there.